I now want to welcome this amazing group of youth leaders who are presenting on the panel on fire, Youth Leading the Way. I want to thank all of the leaders for your important work and leadership. Youth activists are in fact on fire. Youth climate activists from across the world have been rising to demand a healthy and just future for all generations and leading and teaching so many of us about where they stand, their positionality, and the path forward as they see it. And we're very honored to have them all here with us today for the assembly. And this panel is going to be moderated by my dear friend and ally, Niria Alicia Garcia. Niria is Xicana and an Indígena community organizer, educator, storykeeper, and human rights advocate. She was the UN Young Champion of the Earth 2020. Congratulations for that. I remember that. And she is a key organizer for the Run4Salmon Prayer, which happens here in California. And Niria is from Turtle Island, USA. And I'm really glad to see you and so honored you could be here to run this panel. You have the floor, Niria.
Thank you, Osprey. My gosh, I don't think I've seen you in life since the time we got rounded up at the UN at
Yeah.
COP, whatever COP number that was. I'm young, but I'm getting older. Well, thank you, Osprey, and welcome everybody to the Global Women's Assembly for Climate Justice. As Osprey mentioned, my name is Niria Alicia. I'm Xicana Indígena, born and raised in Southern Oregon, a small mixed status farm worker community. My raíces are in Michoacán and Chihuahua, Mexico. Descendant. I'm a mom, and to just get to the point, my life's purpose is to protect the sacredness of Mother Earth and the dignity of our historically oppressed peoples worldwide. And I'm so honored to be moderating today's On Fire Youth Leading the Way. But before we get started and we move into the magic and medicine that each one of these women is bringing to the space, I want to just invite us all to take a deep breath and close our eyes and take a moment to connect, to honor, and to ground in our collective power. Taking in a breath, I invite us to turn our spiritual gaze towards our own ancestors, the ancestors on whose shoulders we stand here today. Lifting our hearts to honor their struggle, their sacrifice, their brilliance, and the love that made it possible for all of us to be here on this webinar today. Inhaling and exhaling. Thank you, ancestors. We love you. And I want to just, this next moment, invite us to just open our hearts to grieve together the tragedies that we're experiencing as a global community right now. Think about all the places that are on your heart, all the rivers, all the mountains, all the communities, the children, the elders, all around the world. And just feel the heaviness of this moment. This is such a heavy moment we are in as a global community. Take a deep breath. Again, grounding in the power of our ancestors to be able to hold the grief, the immense grief we're experiencing. And grounding, lastly, grounding and celebrating that we're in this together, that we're not alone, and having faith that our ancestors have sent and are sending the right people that are needed for this time. The right next generation of leaders who are already shaping, pushing, advocating, organizing, and creating a new path for the new solutions that are necessary for the next generations to come. Take one last breath and exhale. You can open your eyes and welcome again to this panel. Before I introduce our amazing speakers, I just want to give a little bit of context about why this panel is particularly important. And that is because for some of you, you may already know, some of you, you may not know. But as Indigenous people, we make less than 5% of the world's population, yet we steward 80%, 80% of the world's biodiversity. And our young peoples, especially our women and our two-spirit peoples, we are the inheritors of that sacred knowledge. We are the ones who will carry on the work of our ancestors, and we are the ones who will pass the baton to the generations that are yet to come. And so, for many of us that come from millennial cultures, we understand that a lot of that knowledge is held in the hearts and spirits of the women and the two-spirit people in our community. Women are the mothers, women are the first language teachers, women are the ones who hold it down, who are the backbone worldwide. And so I'm honored to be presenting this series of 6 amazing speakers that you're looking at them, you guys. You are looking at the next generation. And like I said to them before we came onto this panel, like, I want to take a moment because I know I'm of my life, because that's just the nature of this work. There is so much at stake. This is not a pastime. I know everyone on this panel is deeply committed to doing this work. And so just to go into it, I want to introduce our first panelist, who I believe is going to be, couldn't be here today with us, but we're going to get to be with her by way of this pre-recorded film. And that is Mitzi Jonelle Tan. She's the convener of Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines. She's a senior advisor for fossil fuels non-proliferation treaties, and she hails from the Philippines. So I'll pass it over to whoever's going to play the video for Mitzi.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mitzi Jonelle Tan, a youth climate justice activist from the Philippines, and I'm so honored to be here today at the Global Women's Assembly for Climate Justice. Thank you to WECAN for creating this space for us to come together as a powerful force of change. My country, the Philippines, knows too well the devastating impacts of the climate crisis. I come from a place where typhoons are becoming fiercer, where entire communities are being swallowed by rising seas, and where those who stand up to protect our planet face threats, harassment, and even death, often at the hands of militarization. But I also come from a place of fierce resistance, where frontline defenders and Indigenous leaders stand unwavering in their fight to protect the land, waters, and future generations, where young people and marginalized people have led the way to topple down dictatorships, where we have not just fought for our right to survive, but our right to live. And this is the lens and the foundation that shaped my activism. And I remember my first UN climate summit was COP26 in Glasgow, and I really went with high hopes, ready to demand real climate action. But I left heartbroken. The final text didn't clearly address fossil fuels, one of the very roots of the climate crisis, and it felt like a betrayal, as if the words that they were discussing and arguing about on this piece of paper wasn't directly related to people's lives across the world. It felt like a door being closed on the future that we are fighting for. But in that same year, I learned about the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it gave me hope. This treaty that's patterned after past peace treaties, such as the Landmines Treaty and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, where civil society pushed for bold systemic changes that actually worked. It showed me that we have the power to demand more and to demand real change. And so as we look to COP30 in Brazil, we need clear decisions on fossil fuel and finance. We cannot keep dancing around this issue. As we approach COP30, we need concrete, bold decisions and not just vague promises. We need a clear commitment to phase out fossil fuels, and this means ending all new exploration and extraction and ensuring a just transition away from these harmful industries. But just as important is the question of finance. For too long, climate finance has been tied to loans that burden the most vulnerable countries with crippling debt, trapping them in cycles of poverty and dependence. This is unacceptable. Climate finance must be given as grants, unconditional, accessible funding that supports communities and countries in their transition to clean energy, resilience, and recovery, so that includes funds for adaptation and funds for loss and damage. This funding must prioritize those most affected by the climate crisis, because without justice in finance, we cannot achieve justice in climate action. COP30 must deliver on these demands, or it risks being yet another failure for those in the front lines. And when we talk about phasing out fossil fuels and the climate crisis in general, we must also talk about who is most impacted by this extractive industry. Women, particularly in the global south, are often the first to feel the effects of climate disasters. We see this in my own country, where women in fishing and farming communities lose their livelihoods, where they are forced to migrate, and where they bear the emotional and physical burden of rebuilding after every storm. We know that the fossil fuel industry not only fuels climate chaos, but also violence against women in indigenous communities. We cannot separate the fight for climate justice from the fight for gender justice. We must remember that frontline communities often have the solutions. We need to include them, learn from them, and ensure they lead this decision. And we need to remember that they have the solutions, because where there is greatest repression and oppression, there you have the greatest voices of resistance. Where there is the least resources, there you will find the most creative and resourceful people, because they have no choice but to become resourceful, to become innovative in order to survive. And so when we learn from them, when we include them, when we support and scale up their solutions, we're able to support not just them, but everyone across the world, because when it benefits the most marginalized, it benefits all of us. And we've seen a lot of leadership from these most marginalized areas, from many Pacific islands, as well as Colombia, for example, who have endorsed the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which I really see as a crucial step for youth, gender, and human rights. We know that the climate crisis is not a distant threat. It is a present, lived reality for millions around the world, and its impacts are not felt equally. It is young people, women, indigenous peoples, and marginalized communities who bear the brunt of this crisis, despite being the least responsible for causing it. This crisis is not just about numbers or policies, it's about lives, about our homes, our families, and the places, experiences, and people that we love. At the heart of this fight is our commitment to protect what we cherish most: life. And for decades, we have been trapped in a cycle of broken promises and empty words from governments and corporations. We have seen countless climate conferences where fossil fuel lobbyists roam the halls, whispering into the ears of policymakers, while frontline voices are often silenced or sidelined. And so this is why we're pushing for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, this global framework to ensure that we have a phase out of fossil fuels, supporting a just transition for workers and communities and the global south, and investing in real climate solutions. The treaty will become a legally binding document, and our collective action, our voices, our resistance are laying the groundwork to turn this vision into reality. But this treaty is not just a piece of paper for governments to sign and discuss. It is also a movement campaign driven by the collective power of communities, civil society, and frontline defenders who refuse to let fossil fuel corporations dictate our future. To make this treaty a reality, we need more champions. We need more cities, organizations, movements, individuals to sign on and call for the fossil fuel treaty. Every new supporter amplifies our message that a fossil-free future is not just possible, it is essential for justice and survival. The treaty is about more than just cutting emissions. It's about dismantling the root causes of this crisis. It's about breaking free from the grip of fossil fuel corporations that have profited from our suffering, ensuring that we're moving away from from this extractivist system into a post-extractivist system. It's about challenging the power structures that prioritize profit over people and the planet, and about creating a world where human rights, gender justice, and climate justice are at the center of every decision. It is about life and the sacred duty to protect what we love. And as young people, we are often told that we are the future, but the truth is we are also the present. Alongside the most marginalized peoples, alongside movement elders, we are taking to the streets, building movements, and holding those in power accountable. We are learning from our movement elders, from past civil rights and civil society struggles, and today we carry that legacy forward. We are the ones pushing for a world where our rights, our voices, and our futures are not sacrificed for corporate greed. And so we cannot wait for the so-called leaders of today to act. We are the leaders we have been waiting for. And to the decision makers, organizations, cities, and policymakers here, I say that the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is not a radical demand. I'll say that again. The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is not a radical demand. It is the bare minimum for us to survive and thrive. So if you truly believe in climate justice, if you love anything on this planet, if you truly stand for human rights, then stand with us. Support the Fossil Fuel Treaty, phase out fossil fuels, ensure that we have fair, funded, just transition, and we ensure that we have climate finance in the form of grants and not loans, and join us in building a world where no one is left behind. Thank you, and let's continue this fight, not just for our survival, but for our liberation, for a world where the rights of people and the planet come before profit, for a future that is fossil-free and full of justice, equality, and hope. Thank you.
Wow. Let's just take a deep breath. Thank you, Mitzi. Yeah, let's see, if you love that, let's see some hearts, let's see some thumbs up. She really threw it down. Mitzi, wherever you are, we are sending love, power, and protection to you. And yeah, for those of you, I just want to invite you to get on chat and type in whatever is staying with you from what she shared. For me, what I'm feeling echoing right now in my ears is we all have a sacred duty to protect what we love. We all have a sacred duty to protect what we love. So if you're feeling moved, if you're feeling inspired by Mitzi, go ahead and share in the chat takeaways you're taking from her presentation. Here, I'll share in the chat that because I thought that was so beautiful. We all have the sacred duty to protect what we love. All right. And yeah, so just to add a little bit of more context, the Philippines, according to Global Witness, is among the top 3 countries that has the highest number of killings of land defenders. Not only that, but over 40% of those land defenders are Indigenous people. So just keep that in mind. Just keep these little numbers in mind. And according to Global Witness, in 2023, 85% of the killings of land defenders happened in Latin America. And so our next speaker that I'm honored to be introducing to you all today comes from Mexico. Mexico is among the top 5 countries that experiences a high level of attacks towards land defenders. And so this next speaker, her name is Maria Reyes. Maria Reyes is a climate and human rights activist and fundraising coordinator of the Alliance of Non-Governmental Radical Youth. And so let's give her a round of applause. Let's give her some heart emojis, some thumbs up. Maria, over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I work on the intersection of building infrastructure for the protection of environmental defenders and climate activists at risk. But I also work with diverse youth collectives that are trying to mobilize into the international climate diplomacy space, trying to advance the protection of our rights in our communities in the UN climate negotiations. So today I wanted to speak a bit on the cooptation of the youth movement and how this is a growing problem among the just transition and fossil fuel phase-out narratives. So just to give you a bit of context, we know that in the last couple of years, particularly in the last 6 years, the youth movement has gained a lot of power and gained a lot of tractions. You might remember seeing mobilizations on the streets convened by Fridays for Future and diverse groups across the world. And the youth movement was really all over the news. And from there, we became a catalyzing force. And that catalyzing force has the power of being a turning point. So Indigenous peoples and land defenders are the ones who have been defending and protecting our planet for the longest time. The youth, we've been around for shorter than that. The youth climate movement has been around for just a couple of years compared to them. However, the youth movement has a lot more of media traction. And that's why we become this catalyzing force and we're at a turning point. However, we're in a moment on time where talking about climate action and about youth representation is not enough, because youth is a demographic. It's not a political grouping. And so when we're advocating for youth to be at the center of the decision-making tables, we're opening the door for many things to come with that if we're not specific about the political horizon that we are pursuing. And that's why I wanted to introduce this concept of cooptation. We see that as we're advocating for a fossil fuel phase out all across the world, the conversation about the just energy transition is getting a lot of traction, and very rightfully so, because if we are not advocating for fossil fuels, then what is the alternative? However, if we do not have clear that the root causes of the climate crisis is not the emissions, but the colonization, we open the door for many people to being co-opted. And I want to give my personal example with this, because I have been co-opted by people that have been promoting false climate solutions, particularly around COP27 in Egypt. I was approached by people that were trying to advance the carbon capture storage conversation, which basically consists on like taking the emissions from the atmosphere and like injecting them into the ground, and then following the principle that somehow they're going to stay under the ground like forever. And they were really trying to recruit young people to advocate for these narratives. And I fell into that trap. First, because they offer you like media spotlights. And of course, as youth activists, we're very excited about that. And I have also been offered like travels to conferences like COP to do that. And I'm someone who has always been considered a little bit of a radical one into the youth movement. But nonetheless, I fell for that trap because they're very clever in the ways that they advertise these false climate solutions. So they got me to say that carbon capture and storage was a way of climate reparations. And if you Google my name, there's an article where I'm like endorsing that. And I really want to take this space to also like reframe that narrative, as in, I did not have the political education in that moment to question those beliefs and to question the way that I was being utilized to advance false climate solutions. And I was very lucky to be organizing with Indigenous peoples, land defenders, and social workers in Mexico who called me out respectfully and kindly and taught me how what I was saying was actually not aligned with my values. And a lot of the problem is that a lot of the youth that organize in this UN climate and negotiation spaces, they don't have those communities to call them in, to call them out and then call them in. And so we really need to be building spaces for political education of youth to fight the cooptation of the youth movement to promote these false narratives. Because when we fall for this, we end up advertising things that inherently are harming Indigenous communities, and local communities, and frontline defenders. And so we end up harming the communities that we are supposed to support. And I've talked with many like elders in the movement, especially in the Indigenous movement across Latin America, and they tell me that coming from the communities, if you don't know anything about the foreign climate movement, they end up seeing the youth climate movement as an oppositor as much as the companies and the governments, because we go out there into the media and conferences promoting narratives that are harming them. And so we believe that we're fighting for the same. Like as youth, we believe we're fighting for the same. But if we're not careful about our tactics and our rhetorics, then we are actually harming the people that we are supposed to support. So I really wanted to emphasize that, especially now that we're coming into COP30. There's a big conversation around the just energy transition. And especially in the Latin American context, the just energy transition comes with a lot of land grabbing. And it also comes with a lot of false solutions being pushed into the agenda, like the UNFCCC, like this UN climate change conferences, relay a lot on the trades of carbon markets. Like it's not something that is happening under the table like fossil fuel deals. It is actually on the agenda. There's a whole negotiation tracks on carbon markets. And we are normalizing that because we're lacking criticism about the root cause of the climate crisis. It's not the emissions, it's colonialism. And therefore, we're allowing youth to be co-opted to promote things that are just moving us from one extractive system to another. So I really want to take this moment to also bring a little bit of that critical thinking and on how, as youth, taking a seat on the table is not enough. We need to have a clear political horizon and a political horizon that is aligned with uprooting the causes of the climate crisis. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. Just wow, Maria. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. That was a lot of amazing political insight and yeah, personal. Oh my God. Okay, I'm just gonna, so everybody, please jot down the questions because there will be Q&A. Maria, I wrote down some questions for you, so we'll get to that. But yes, my people on the other side of the screen, take notes because we are getting schooled right now. And the school continues. Our next speaker that I have the honor to be presenting is Samaï Malaïca Gualinga. Samaï is from the Kichwa Nation. Samaï is the Vice President of Kichwa Sarayaku Indigenous Peoples, defender of the rights of Indigenous peoples and nature, and she's coming to us from her homelands in the country of Ecuador. Samaï, over to you. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, good afternoon to everybody. Maybe it's good evening or good morning, depending on where you are. I know we're in different parts of the globe. My name is Samaï Gualinga, and I am from the Kichwa native peoples of Sarayaku in Ecuador in the Amazon region. I'm a Kichwa woman who comes from Sarayaku. And Sarayaku means rivers of corn. This is a living territory. And I'm right here in my territory right now. This is Sarayaku, where I live, my own home. And I live here. I am currently vice president of the Sarayaku Nation. And I've been in this struggle to defend my territory and defend my people since I was very young. I have done it a lot more through the world of communication and design and art, so that I can really provide a future for my children and future generations who are coming from the people at Sarayaku and also other peoples around the world. I was born here and I grew up here, and I was taught how to respect, how to take care of, and how to preserve our nature, our territory, and our living beings, which are not just human beings, but also we have a deep connection with beings that we don't even see, that are invisible, but that exist within our territory, which are beings that protect us, that protect our trees and our homes and our lakes. They provide us with stability in our life throughout our territory. We are not just defending our own territories. Actually, we've also been providing proposals that make it possible to repair the damage of climate change around the world. And we have made a declaration. It's called Kausak Sachai, the living forest, which is what we call it in English, the living forest. So, and this means life in harmony with nature. And this is something that we have learned from our ancestors. Sumak Kausai, it's called. And we want our territory to be declared a living forest of Sumak Kausai. And so we have created our own proposal to defend our territory and the life that exists here in Sarayaku. This is a place that has been in resistance. We expelled an oil company that used to be in our territory. I was very small at that time. I was about 10 or 11 years old. And I saw it myself. And our parents fought to ensure that the town of Sarayaku would not be exploited, the village of Sarayaku. And we saw what a disgrace this oil extraction was, the extraction of our non-renewable resources. And since I was a kid, I've followed that path and that legacy of activism and not letting others harm our territory and our living forest. We want to be able to continue to live on our territories, healthy territories where we can fish and herd and grow. And we want our kids to be able to swim in healthy rivers where they don't have to suffer the consequences that we adults might have exposed them to. And so this is a struggle that's been going on for many generations, and we continue to convey it to our children. We have also set forth different proposals whereby we, the territories and the peoples, we have all of the knowledge and wisdom of how we should manage and administer our territories. And it's very important that in these big global conferences, they hear from the peoples who are defending their territories and the real solutions to climate change that they have to offer. So they should hand the baton to the peoples themselves, the native peoples, to really guide the change that we need in order to preserve and contribute to stopping climate change. And we've also been making proposals by which Native peoples can directly receive financing that allows them to protect themselves and protect the planet. This is one of the struggles that we've had, one of the fights we've been in, and we've been offering these types of alternative proposals to bring about a change, because if we don't start right now, then one day all of this will be gone. All of this nature and our non-renewable resources will be gone. And that's not the time to try to change things. So I would really like to share with everyone the wisdom and the knowledge that we have here, so that folks who are far away and perhaps maybe disconnected from their own natural surroundings and their own land can sort of gain an awareness of this and figure out how to propose their own real solutions. That has to do with trusting the people, trusting us, and really contributing. So I have always asked, how willing are you all to make a change in your own lives, to be able to really contribute to stopping climate change and leaving aside the consumerist system that is fueling climate change? Because often, perhaps, we don't see a way to live in harmony and coexistence with the natural world, but it does exist. We do have ways to live peacefully within our territories. And that is a message that we would like to share with you from our own territories, so that you can be aware of the possibilities and be part of the positive changes that are possible so that we can protect this territory and all territories and planet Earth. Thank you.
Tlazokamati Samaï, muchas gracias. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Ecuador to share your beautiful insights and to share your experience and your love for your homelands. I want to invite everybody to write down your questions, take notes, and I want to introduce our last and final speaker for this panel. Her name is Xiye Bastida. She comes from the Otomi-Toltec Nation. She is the co-founder and executive director of the Re-Earth Initiative that is based in Mexico and the United States. Over to you, Xiye. Thank you for being with us today.
Hello. So I'm having lots of audio issues and tech issues, so apologies for that. But thank you so much, Niria and Maria and Samaï and Mitzi and Osprey for hosting this beautiful, beautiful space. I hope you can hear me okay. Is my computer audio fine?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay, amazing. Well, what I'm going to talk about is the resources and the financing that has to come into the climate movement and also the youth movement. I really appreciate what Maria said about the co-option of the movement, because it's also one of the ways in which we are and our communities are tricked into believe that we can only access finance and we sell or we part of these extractivist models that I have heard a lot recently, if you have been following the latest forest agreement that the United Nations wants to push forward, the Tropical Forest Forever Facility. They want to now, the investors, they want to become rich from the protection of nature. That is what the new climate solution is, to put a fund of money into protection of all of the forests in the world, and then say the investors get the first 5% of returns, and then the countries that have forests get the next 2%, and maybe, only maybe, will the communities get access to that funding. So we have a real issue where we know that we need to shift our whole economy, but the people who have historically benefited from extraction are the same people who want to benefit from regeneration and protection. All of the work that indigenous communities have done at the front lines, now they want to reap the benefits again. So this is about perpetuating colonial power dynamics. That is what's happening now with our so-called climate solutions. So what do we actually do to build up the movement's capacity to receive the much needed funding for our communities to not have to work in factories, to not have to work for the mining industry, to not have to work for the oil industries, because that is what's going on. Our communities have necessities when we are put into an economic system where I'm not able to tell my uncle he cannot go work at the factory that's near our home because he has debts now. We have been pulled into a financial and economic system. So if we want to protect our land, we need to be able to access resources that are not tied to the same patterns of exploitation. What we are doing at Re-Earth Initiative, which is the organization that I co-founded and I am the executive director of, is we are building the youth movements and the frontline community and indigenous movements' ability and capacity to receive funding. Because we know that even if we got the movement, for some reason, if anybody was going to give the movement $10 million, $100 million, would we be able to effectively use it? Would we be able to effectively absorb it and then turn it into solutions? I think the system is so complicated that once we become registered organizations, once we have to go into reporting, once we have to go into grant after grant after grant application, we become so desensitized that we then have to shift our focus and we forget about why we started doing this in the first place, what the solutions that we were pushing for and championing. So what we're doing at Re-Earth Initiative is, our main focus is to fund frontline communities, to fund the next generation of youth leaders, but not only monetarily, also with resources on capacity building. Let's say some percentages of the 2,000 applications that we got in our last regranting cycle, 60% of them came from Africa, and about 40% of them came from South America, from Oceania, from Asia, and about only 10% came from the global north. And if they were from the global north, they were from frontline communities within the global north. So we have a really good map of where resources are needed. But of all of those applications, I would say that about 70 to 80% of them didn't have clear timelines or budgets or anything where we could actually say that this is a project that needs funding. And we know that there are projects like this all over the world. So we are noticing that the actual gap is not necessarily in the funding, but also in how our community are able to act project when effectively, because we're pushing is created when the fund for mitigation and the fund for adaptation, where all of this come, we are banking on the fact that we are just going to have to teach each other, teach our communities, especially youth who now have access to different languages. You know, my grandma couldn't even read or write, and now I have the privilege of being able to speak English and tell her stories. So we have to be conscious of that as the new generation of youth who is connected across the world, to be able to learn these systems, to dismantle them, to bring the resources to our communities. And that is what we're focusing on now. Not only asking the questions of the things that we're demanding, but building up the tools to actually transform the world, the tools to be able to measure the impact that Indigenous communities have had. And that at the end of the day, it is not about how the global north and all of these finance mechanisms come to our territories. It's actually about how they ask for forgiveness for the harm that they have caused. And maybe then we can co-create something together. Maybe. I was just at a dinner in London Climate Week where a lot of very important and fancy people were talking about nature financing and nature financing mechanisms. There were over 100 guests and only 2 Indigenous representatives. And I told them, you first need to ask for forgiveness before you think you can come into our communities and impose a solution that is only going to make you richer. What are we redefining as wealth? How are we going to make sure that the wealth is in life, in our living, thriving forests and oceans? And most importantly, in the wisdom of past generations and the stability of our descendants. That is where we're heading. And I think we all know that the next 25 years, the next generation is going to be the critical timeline for the path that we choose. So the challenge for youth is to stay grounded, as Maria put it, and to not be co-opted, to have communities that can call us in. But the challenge for the world is to ask and question the systems that have made it so that the global north has become so rich from our lands, and that doesn't happen with the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Xiye, for being with us and sharing all that important insight. Very, very, very valuable, very insightful, very potent. Now I wanted to move us on to our Q&A. All right, well, my first question is for you, Maria. You talked about how youth climate movements are being co-opted, and I wanted to ask you, what are some things we can do to prevent other youth from being co-opted?
I think creating community is a first step. As I was sharing, after I was replicating harmful narratives, I had a community at home that called me out and then called me in. And a lot of youth that do not come from grassroots communities don't have that. So we need to create that. We need to create communities within the spaces where these youth are. And then we need political education. We need to, as she was saying, like, we're coming to a point where we have to teach each other how the system works and then how to, break the system down. So I think we also need that. Like, we need to educate each other. We need to educate the youth on going beyond the emissions. Like, what are the root causes of the climate crisis? And like, how can we generally target like the root causes of extractivism? And I think we also need to question representation. Um, I, I think it is not feasible to expect that because someone is part of a community, they will represent the best interests of that community. I think whenever you platform youth, you need to be asking, who are you accountable to? And who are you working with? Because so many people get profiled into this, like, the commodification of the climate narratives, and they end up acting in very individual ways. Um, so we really need to be spotlighting the people that are working in communities, and whose actions are going to reflect on communities on the ground.
Wow, thank you so much, Maria. And I think that's one of the beautiful things when I think about um, times where I was in these international spaces as well, getting really confused by the ever-changing, evolving language. And these companies are so good at like nature-based solutions and like changing their language to make it seem more appealing. And I'm so grateful. I had elders who were like, no, 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 para allá no. Véngase para acá. No, don't go over there. No, it looks fancy, but not all that shines is glitter. So yes, elders, who are you accountable to? And who do you represent? Thank you so much, Maria, for that insight. My next question is for Samaï. Samaï, you spoke about how your community was successful in pushing out an oil company from your homelands, and that is big. That is a big success. And my question to you is, what are some of the key, what was the key to, in your opinion, to Sarayaku's success in kicking this oil company out?
The main thing was the women's struggle. Because they couldn't fool these women because they explained that they were going to like sacrifice part of the land and to get their kids off of that land. That was like one of the first reactions. As I said, I was really young at the time. And I remember the women could not be fooled, but Sarayaku had to come together and unite and fight together. We had to do all kinds of planning using the schools and the day-to-day activities. There was a period of 6 months where all the normal day-to-day stuff had to be paused so that we could focus on getting rid of that oil company. And people in Sarayaku, women, children, adults, elders, were guarding the borders of Sarayaku to, in a peaceful way, guard our territory and make sure that we could do this peacefully. Although we did receive a violent response from the government and the company, we wanted something much more peaceful. And thanks to that, we were able to have access to the Inter-American Human Rights Court and bring the case of Sarayaku and really assert our right to be consulted as Indigenous peoples. And still, they're not really complying with this in Ecuador because we still don't have sorry, I lost my audio there. So it's been tough. But the people of Sarayaku came together, and women gave their all to say no to the old company. And we didn't want a monetization of the resources here. What we wanted was our territory and our life here. And so it was a constant struggle. And it took like 10 years to win this case, and lot of things. And they're complying with some of what was set out, but they still aren't fully complying with it. So the state hasn't totally complied with free, prior, and informed consent, which is our right. And we're still defending the territory of Sarayaku with the same respect, with the same heart that our ancestors have had.
Gracias, Samaï. Thank you so much, Samaï. I'm like really just impacted by hearing you say how the key to this struggle was women. And I'm seeing the imagery of elders and children and mothers peacefully protesting and peacefully standing to defend their sacred land. So yeah, for those of you on the other side of the screen, take notes, because if you're a funder, these are the criteria. Our panelists right now are giving you the criteria for who you should be channeling resources to, right? Thank you so much, Samaï. My next question is for you, Xiye, and you cut out for a moment there, but you were hitting this really important point. You were talking about how 70 to 80% of applications that you receive don't have a timeline, and the gap is not in funding, it is in how our communities are able to, and then you cut out. And I'm like, wait, that's such a cliffhanger. You cut out for me. I'm not sure if you cut out for everybody, but it was like I was like writing it down and I was like, wait. So do you mind sharing that that point you were trying to convey?
Yes, of course. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Sorry about the technical difficulties. I did spill
It's
water on
okay.
my computer a couple of weeks ago. And not be representative of other data, but we have talked to other youth funders, and they have found the same, which is that if we don't, it's really hard to write a grant application. It's really difficult to know what the funders want. And if our communities don't have the skills, not because they are not doing the work, but because no one is born a grant writer. So we don't have the skills to communicate the timeline of our projects, the impact that it has, how many members it engages, then we're just not going to be trusted to handle funding. That's what happens time and time again. We know that the climate movement gets about 1 to 2% of all funding, and of that, youth get 0.76% of funding, and Indigenous communities get less than 1% of funding. So it is systemic that we are just not trusted with the resources that we need to have long-term goals and to not have to leave our communities or sell our land to illegal miners, and so many other things that happen because there is no resources coming in. So that is the gap that we're trying to fill, and we have learned a lot working with youth from over 100 countries to see how we can help them in their.
Thank you, Xiye. And my actual question to you was, in your wild, you talked about, you talked about how, and I can personally relate to this. My grandpa was a miner, and a lot of my family in Mexico, they get these international agricultural companies that come and buy it out and, misinform them about pesticides and everything. But and you said, I can't tell my family to not work for these extractive companies. And so, like, in your wildest dreams, how can we create alternatives for our communities to not have to go work for extractive industries?
I think that's a really, really important question. And we need to also remember that for a lot of communities, for example, I spent about 10 days in Yukevik, Alaska, where the principal mode of employment is oil extraction. I also went to parts of the Napo River in Ecuador where the illegal mining activity is growing at alarming rates. And there are community members from indigenous communities that have to work for the mining companies. So what I've learned, and in my own case in Mexico, my community is surrounded by a lot of different industrial mega sites with over 2,000 factories polluting our aquifer and our river. And I remember when I was young and I asked my uncle, what do you do for work? And he said, I work at the factory. And I was so shocked because he's the uncle doing ceremonies with us, hosting the mezcal with us. He's the uncle who taught me how to speak Otomi and pray, and to see that he's working in a factory was like almost felt like betrayal. But as I grew up, I understood that when somebody needs resources, it's who's offering them. So what we need to stop this from happening is, first of all, make sure that our communities are connected, resilient, that we work as a whole community. And because we need to remember that what capitalism does is turn us into individuals so that we become protective of our own finances, and then we don't resort to sharing activities and others. In my grandma's kitchen, it's always anybody who wants to come gets fed. It doesn't matter, we don't even know them. But do these traditions die as the elders pass away? They shouldn't. That's why we need to learn them, because we need to remember that also a solution to the climate crisis is preserving our own cultures. And the climate crisis also harms a lot of the traditions and cultural activities that keep us connected to our lands. So in my perfect world, our communities would have the climate justice looks like our communities having the right to live in our lands undisturbed, live in our lands, thrive in our lands without any company, any mega project coming through and telling us that they have progress, that we redefine what progress means, and we reclaim progress to be connection to the land, that we can live from the land in reciprocity with our land. I was talking to somebody from Belém a couple of days ago, and she said, if they want to come to Belém, they should at least get to know us, because what's the point of traveling across the world for the climate conferences if you're not even going to get to know the place that you're at? So that is just another call to action for really making sure that we're centering territory first and foremost in all of our climate work.
Thank you, Xiye. Thank you, Samaï. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everybody, for coming and attending. Thank you, Osprey and the WECAN team for bringing this. I mean, I don't know about you all, but I feel way better after this panel than I did when I joined, because I feel less alone. And so, yeah, thank you for coming. Please follow Samaï, please follow Xiye, and please follow Maria and support their work. And I will pass it over to Osprey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Niria, for your beautiful moderation and helping us with this youth panel and the incredible work you've done. And I want to thank the panelists. This was really an extraordinary panel. And, Maria, I want to thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty, because we all can learn from it. And it takes courage to be vulnerable with what you shared. And I think we can all relate to that situation. And, I want to say, I think also as elders, we need to support the youth so that they have the support they're requesting to not get co-opted. I think it's also our responsibility to ensure that, and to meet the demand that was made today, to ensure that we support youth education so that they have what they need to be equipped to do this work in a very complex political landscape. And that's also our role to step into that. So thank you for that. And also just to say, it's not the youth. A lot of us who've jumped into the climate movement have to navigate these complexities and have made similar errors. So also to say, you're certainly not alone. And also to you, Samaï, I really congratulate you as a young woman who's become a vice president of a nation. And I really wanted to lift up your leadership. I knew you many years ago, and have watched you evolve through your work in communications for your community, and I really respect you as a leader, and thank you for leading your nation. And many times when we think about Indigenous communities, people forget to recognize that these are individual nations and entire peoples and a way of life. And thank you for sharing with us the Living Forest Declaration and your dedication and the incredible strength that the Sarayaku community has. I've been so honored to work with all of you for many years. So thank you for your work. And then lastly, and of course, we're addressing those speakers who are live. I know there's a few that that were not able to join, and Mitzi came through her wonderful presentation through her recorded message. But I wanted to also thank you, Xiye, for your leadership. Also have watched you over the years, and the critical analysis that you're bringing to the conversation, and also that you had mentioned the really very scary proposal that is coming out of the UN and different bodies around the forest proposal and initiative that will be presented at Brazil. And again, as you said, it's the same old market mechanisms wrapped up in new language, and a lot of governments and financial institutions have a real knack for doing that. New pledges, new programs, and basically not transforming the structure and systems that are perpetuating further harm, colonization, market-based mechanisms, patriarchy, furthering capitalism, and these practices. And I really applaud how much you have really done so well in articulating so many of these causes and pointing out how we need to navigate so many contradictions in the system, and that you have been in many spaces speaking truth to power and been bold and spoken directly to their faces. And I really respect and honor you for doing that, and will continue to stand with you in that endeavor. So to me, it is just always such a joy to invite youth into our spaces, to see our future, to see your leadership, and how much we also need to really listen to our youth to guide us, because we can never forget that the youth are going to be living from the decisions we make from today, and the generational power that they have and knowledge from their lived experience, their bodies telling them that their lives are on the line. We can never forget the urgency and the requests that they're making. So I applaud you all, and I thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you so much. And again, Niria, thank you. Really appreciate your work here to help us with this session.